For proof, look no further than the country's efforts to privatize its state-owned airline. Wanting to transform South Africa Airways into a moneymaker that could attract lucrative bids from investors, ANC officials were almost gleeful in 1998 when they hired an American turnaround specialist, T. Coleman Andrews III, to run the carrier. A Republican and a former candidate for governor of Virginia, Andrews was hired to nudge SAA into the global marketplace with some good old-fashioned American business know-how. He did just that, immediately sizing up the competition and setting his sights on Sun Air, a small but nimble regional airline. Slashing fares and flooding the skies with cheap flights, Andrews bludgeoned Sun Air into bankruptcy within a year of his arrival, leaving SAA to gobble up most of its passengers and expand its share of the regional market. The ANC seethed. Sun Air was their baby, the government's first successful effort at brokering a deal to create a viable black-owned company after decades in which blacks were legally banned from owning property. Within 3 years, Andrews had worn out his welcome. He left the country with a $24 million severance package, the largest in the country's history, and SAA with as much red ink as when he arrived. The $4 million profit that Andrews claimed on the carrier's 2001 balance sheet evaporated after auditors discovered an Enron-like accounting scheme that reported as profit the one-time revenues from the sales of planes and equipment. Those auditors said the airline actually lost about $73 million in 2001, roughly the same as in the year before Andrews arrived, when adjusted for currency devaluations. It was criminal, said Victor Nkosi, SAA's vice president for marketing. The core business was not any more profitable than when he found it, once you account for the assets he stripped. We wanted an American to show us the ropes, and he took us for a good ride. Similarly, South Africa's effort to redistribute land to the poor has lagged. With little money and a willing buyer, willing seller policy intended to mollify foreign investors concerned about property rights and public spending, the government has been unable to purchase at market prices much of the 87% of arable land owned by the country's white elite. At the current pace, experts say it will take another 120 years to resettle blacks in proportion to their numbers. Frustrated by the government's snail pace, about 2,500 squatters in 2001 relocated to a patch of unused land owned by a farmer near Johannesburg. The ANC sent police in riot gear and armored cars to escort construction workers who tore through the groves of tin shacks with crowbars, leaving one home after another in a heap of scrap metal and ripped tarpaulin. No one missed the scene's eerie similarity to those of the apartheid era, when the white minority government bulldozed whole neighborhoods and throngs of foot-stomping blacks railed against it in the streets. Squatters shook their fists defiantly at the police, while women chanted anti-government slogans and danced in protest, baring their breasts in a gesture of shame meant to taunt the demolition crews. This, said Zakes Hlashwayo, the chairman of an advocacy organization for the poor and landless, as he looked at the demolition from the roadside, is just like the old days. Land ownership plays a critical role in South Africa's HIV epidemic, which has infected an estimated 5 million South Africans, nearly a quarter of all adults. Without land, millions of South Africans have left the countryside for the city, settling in overcrowded slums like Soweto, and sometimes working in the country's mines, which require young men to live in hostels for several months at a time. The combination of idleness and congestion caused by high urban unemployment and the promiscuity encouraged by the mining sector's housing policies fuel the spread of the disease through heterosexual sex, the primary mode of transmission here. Without health care, young men are unlikely to get medical attention for venereal diseases, which left untreated increase the risk of HIV infection by a factor of 9. President Mbeki and his advisors have been reluctant to offer anti-AIDS drugs to HIV-infected people, in part because he and others in the ANC's leadership, many of whom recall earlier sterilization efforts by missionaries and the apartheid government's secret chemical warfare program, are truly skeptical of the efficacy of Western medicine. But just as problematic is that top ANC officials have been slow to provide the cheaper generic versions of the medicine because they fear antagonizing foreign investors by either importing or manufacturing generic drugs that cut into the pharmaceutical companies' profits. That fear is not irrational. Carrying water for the multinational drug companies, which are huge donors to the Democratic Party's coffers, then Vice President Al Gore repeatedly threatened Mbeki with economic sanctions if the ANC were to bypass drug company patents. The World Trade Organization allows the manufacture or importation of generic drugs in the case of public health crisis, but Gore's admonitions persuaded an already reluctant Mbeki, who shied away from getting on Wall Street's bad side. In Johannesburg, a group of activists formed the Soweto Electric Crisis Committee in 2001 to help poor households in the tin shanties and brick hovels that circle the bustling city build atop a mammoth gold reef like rows of rotting teeth, asking nothing in return and relying heavily on laid-off Eskom repairmen who volunteer their time. SEC volunteers rip across the city 5 days a week, sunup to sundown, using a penknife, a snip here and a splice there to reunite power and people. Since then, Operation Khanyisa, which means to light in the Zulu language, has unlawfully restored electricity to about 50,000 homes, though many are repeat customers. We shouldn't have to revert to this, Agnes Mahapi says, as she stands cross-armed and remorseless in the street, watching 2 repairmen work. Apartheid, she says, was a blasphemy. Nothing compares to it. But for all its wretchedness, apartheid never did this. It did not lay her off from her job, jack up her utility bill, then disconnect her service when she inevitably could not pay. Privatization did that, she says, her cadence quickening in disgust. And all of this globalization garbage our new black government has forced upon us has done nothing but make things worse. But we will unite and we will fight this government with the same fury we fought the whites in their day. We are getting about 50 calls each day from the community. Virginia Setchetti, an SECC spokesman, told me in 2002. We don't ask why or when the people were cut off, we just switch them back on. Everyone should have electricity. One of 25,000 employees who have lost their jobs at Eskom since 1994, Bongani Lupisi, arrived at the intersection of Maseka and Moeba Streets one morning, flanked by 2 recruits. Red and white are used as live wires, and they are very dangerous, Lupisi said, showing the wires to the trainees as a crowd gathered. There's definitely been a revival of the struggle mentality, Lupisi told me later. He is 28, the father of a 4-year-old boy. We thought when we got rid of the old government, our black government would take care of us. But instead, the capitalists are getting richer while the working people lose their jobs and can't even meet their basic needs. James Buthelezi is 58 and has lived in his house on Maseka Street for as long as he can remember, and his electricity was disconnected for the first time in 2001. 28 people live in this 5-room house and a tool shed-sized room in the backyard. No one has worked in months, and the family survives on Buthelez's mother's pension, less than $125 a month. He showed me his unpaid bills, which totaled more than $3,000 in South Africa's currency, the rand, and hadn't been paid in almost a year. When they came to cut off our electricity, we begged them not to, he said. We told them that we had babies and elderly people inside. They didn't even pause. This culture of non-payment that people say exists in Soweto, said Chedi, it's only because people don't have money to pay. Said Shadrach Mato, an SECC board member, we did not give up our lives and the lives of our children only to let this brazen capitalist system exploit us even more. The SECC's members have tried to talk to Johannesburg's mayor about the hardships endured by families like Buthelez's, but he has repeatedly given them the slip. In the final weeks of 2001, more than 20 angry residents marched to the mayor's home, but again he ducked them. Unable to cut off his electricity, they disconnected his water.